The National Journal's Jonathan Rauch and the Democratic National Committee's Harry Sevugan. Well, Harry, a lot of noise from the Tea Party. Is it good news for the Democrats or bad news? Good news for the Republicans? Bad news?
I think it's deeply distressing news for the Republican Party. They emerged from Tuesday's primaries deeply divided and with a slate of candidates that were deeply flawed. In Delaware, we have a candidate in Christine O'Donnell who's so far out of the mainstream that she believes that women in our service academies are a detriment to our military. In New York, the GOP standard bearer for the state believes that or wants to turn state prisons into dormitories for people on welfare. And even where the establishment candidates survived their primary by the skin of their teeth, as in New Hampshire and Kelly Ayotte, they've transformed themselves so radically that they're no longer recognizable. Well,
let's talk to Jonathan, because Jonathan, you kind of become the Tea Party expert for National Journal. That's your beat now. I think you wrote that they may be headless, but they're not necessarily mindless. What's your take on what happened?
Well, in the short term, political analysts that I've talked to tend to think the Tea Party is going to be good for Republicans in this cycle because it's going to drive more Republicans and conservative voters to the polls. But they're also pulling the party to the right, and the question is, does that make it harder for the party to win in 2012, a presidential year when the center is going to be very important?
Well, I mean, is it going to make it harder or easier for them to win in November? Because, I mean, you know, I'm old enough to remember 1964. Jack Kennedy beat the establishment candidate, just barely beat him, Richard Nixon, in 1960, and then we had the assassination. Johnson came along, passed the monumental civil rights legislation, and Republicans made no attempt to move to the center. They threw out all the centrists. They threw out all the people from the East Coast and picked a man that I thought was a very good man, Barry Goldwater, but someone who was far to the right of even most people in the Republican Party, and they lost in a landslide.
Well, we're all guessing here, and my guess is not as good as yours because you go back a lot longer than I do and know a good deal more. But remember, off-year elections are different. They're turnout driven. A lot of people who are in the center and not that motivated stay home. So turnout matters more, which is why I tend to think this will still help Republicans, but it's a guessing game.
Well, what was the turnout? Because that's one of the things we haven't really talked about very much. Was big, small, medium?
You know, in some of these races, it was very large, but unfortunately, I'm not up on the details. Harry might know more about that.
What about that, Harry?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of energy out there, but the important thing to remember is that Republicans aren't capturing this energy. This energy is going to Tea Party candidates, not necessarily to Republican candidates. The same could be said of money, and I think we'll see the same thing when we go into Election Day. On the right is deeply fractured right now. And we saw this with Congressman Castle being unwilling to endorse Christine O'Donnell in Delaware.
But, you know, the other party is Democrats are fractured, too, when you come right down to it. Because when you look at the CBS poll that came out this week, 57% said that Barack Obama does not have a plan to solve the country's problems. He has a 45% approval rating. Yeah, the poll shows people don't like Republicans very much. It also shows they just don't like Democrats very much. I mean, frankly, people are mad about everything. So I don't think you've got a free ride coming here.
Certainly not. I think when the economy's in the shape it's in, there's going to be some anxiety, and that's going to reflect in the polls. However, I will say there's a New York Times poll out just yesterday where Republicans had 20% approval. Elections are an exercise
That's our poll. Same poll.
Same poll.
But you are only at 30.
We're at 30, but listen, elections aren't exercises in isolation. They are relative exercises. We're going to be making a choice. And the deeply flawed candidates that the Republican Party has put forward is going to ensure that this isn't necessarily a referendum on the national mood as Republicans would want it, or some of these polling numbers reflect, but rather an individual choice between the candidates.
Jonathan, you've been following the Tea Party people very, very closely. What makes them tick? Because, as you said, they're headless. There is no leader here.
It's a swarm. It's a hive. It's almost, they call it open source politics. And it's hard to generalize because there's no leader. There's no single group. They see themselves as a network of individuals and activists. But one point that's very interesting and important, and the flip side of what you were just saying to Harry, is they don't regard themselves as loyal Republicans. They are very conservative, but they are happy to vote against Republicans because they think they're independents and that both parties have let them down. And that makes them a new kind of very volatile element in American politics because they don't have that partisan loyalty.
Somebody said to me yesterday, and I'm not even sure I agree with this, but they said the Tea Party philosophy, they're not so much interested in what happens next as in what's already happened. They don't care if the candidate they've nominated in Delaware is a weaker candidate than the guy they beat. They were just interested in beating him.
The biggest surprise in my deep dive in National Journal magazine into the Tea Party is that they don't fundamentally see themselves as a political movement about electing people and taking power. They see themselves as a social movement about re-educating the American public to make it more skeptical of big government. It's almost like consciousness raising, like a left-wing movement, and it's much less important to them who they elect than that they send the message about the dangers of big government.
So what's your message got to be, Harry, from here on in? Because clearly you've got a lot of disgruntled Democrats out there, as well as a lot of independents who voted for Barack Obama that sort of have left the party.
Certainly. Look, I think the message out there is going to be, do we continue to move forward with Democratic policies that are slowly getting us out of the ditch that Republicans put us in, or do we hand the keys back to Republicans who put us in the ditch to begin with? And I think when that choice is made, and when people look at the candidates before them, whether it's somebody that's going to continue to move forward, it's a part of the mainstream, or someone far outside the mainstream who's talking about ideas and arguments that we resolved 30 years ago, the choice is going to be very clear. They're going to vote for the Democratic candidate.
But by 2012, you'll have been there 4 years. Is it going to work to say it's all the fault of the guy who was here 4 years ago?
And Bob, I think this is a very important point. This isn't about looking backwards. This is about looking forward and saying, do we want to go back to those policies that got us into this mess to begin with? Our message isn't, it was somebody else's fault. Our message is, let's not go back to the policies that put us here to begin with.
And Jonathan, where do you think the Tea Party will be in 2012?
Well, one question will be, will they still be here? Will they be active? They don't have a hierarchy, a structure. It's hard to maintain that. But I'm guessing that they will still be out there. They'll be like moveon.org. They'll be probably have more ability to project their views. Politically, I don't know which way they pull. That's a really hard call.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you. This is going to be a very interesting political year. We hadn't seen one quite like this in a while, it seems to me. So thank you all both for coming.